A teacher's job is to teach in ways that ensure learning. What researchers know about successful learning situations points to problem-based learning. Let's take a look at some of the challenges that teachers face every day. David Sulla can give us some insights into how to get content into long-term memory. He claims that in order for information to get into long-term memory, it has to make sense and have meaning. So let's try something here. I'm going to show you a group of words. See how many you can memorize without writing them down. How'd you do? It turns out that the average person can remember about 7 disparate pieces of information. Let's look at them again. I'm going to guess that you did a little bit better this time in remembering more of the 13 words that were on that screen. And that's because now the words made sense. We are used to seeing words in sentences with nouns and verbs and adjectives, prepositions. So when we see words in sentences, suddenly they make sense. Let's try it again. Chances are you can remember all 13 words now, or very close to it. Because now the words have meaning. Jim is parachuting from a plane, and his parachute has ripped, but obviously he looks below and there's a haystack, so he's relieved. Once you understand what Jim is doing, then all of these words suddenly not only make sense, but they also have meaning. And that's what it takes to get information into long-term memory. So when you're standing before your students, you want to make sure that you don't sound like 13 disparate words and that you actually are presenting content in a way that makes sense and has meaning. This is best done through problem-based learning, where students are tackling authentic, open-ended problems that offer a context as to why they are learning particular content. Let's look at another challenge, reaching everyone in the classroom. I'm going to give you a little exercise here. I'm going to teach you something that you may not know about, reverse Polish notation. It turns out that computer programmers have a way of calculating numbers that are a little bit different from the typical. Now, here's an algebraic expression, and it would take me 14 keystrokes to put that into a calculator. But if I use reverse Polish notation, it's only 9 keystrokes. Let's look at how a reverse Polish notation calculator actually works. Here's a reverse Polish notation phrase, and I'm going to now show you what the calculator does. First, it looks at the first item and decides, is it a number or an operator? If it's a number, it pushes it onto what's called a stack. It then looks at the next, another number, pushes it onto the stack. Looks at the next, another number, pushes it onto the stack. Okay, so now the calculator looks at the next item and it's an operator. So what it does is it pops the last 2 items off the stack, which would be the 5 and the 10, and it operates on them. And then it pushes the answer back on. So 10 minus 5 is 5, it pushes it back onto the stack. It looks at the next item, another operator. It pops the 5 and the 7 off, multiplies, pushes back the 35. Next up is a 3. What do you think it does? Pushes it onto the stack. Next up, another number, pushes it onto the stack. Can you guess what happens next? Pops the 2 and the 3, adds them together, pushes the 5 back on the stack. And finally, the answer would be 7. That's how a reverse Polish notation calculator works. I can look at it through algebraic notation or reverse Polish notation. Now suppose you were going to try your hand at it. Here's the algebraic expression. Now you have to turn this into reverse Polish notation. I'm not going to ask you to do that now, but I'm simply going to ask, how do you feel about that? Are you like ready to grab a pen and do it? Do you have confidence that you could figure it out? Do you already know how to do it and you're feeling like you're just listening to this podcast and you don't really need this part? Or are you looking at this like, What is she thinking about? I thought I was going to look at a podcast on problem-based learning and how research supports it. Well, just in case you did actually want to try it, here's the answer. But more importantly, the reason that I took you through this little exercise was to show you what often happens in a classroom. A teacher who knows content is presenting the content in what seems to be a very clear way. But there are three distinctly different experiences that are going on for the students. A gentleman by the name of Lev Vygotsky coined the phrase zone of proximal development. He said that everyone has a body of present knowledge, what they know now. Right outside of that is their proximal zone, and that's what they're ready to learn. And beyond that is their distal zone, and that's way beyond what they're capable of learning right now. I would say for like a third grader, multiplication facts and multiplication, the concept of multiplication, would be in their present knowledge. And if so, division is then in their proximal zone. They're ready to tackle that next. But quadratic equations, distal zone, way out there. So for reverse Polish notation, if you already knew about it, then this was in your present knowledge zone. If you happen to be someone who has a strong background in algebra, mathematical problem solving, then chances are you were the one thinking, ooh, I think I can do this. And that meant that learning, that content is in your proximal zone. And if you're sitting there saying, why did I listen to this podcast? I could have signed up for another activity. Well, that probably means that you don't have as strong a mathematical background or interest in mathematical problem solving. And so this is off in your distal zone. Three different experiences can be happening in the classroom. Let's take a further look at what Lev Vygotsky is saying here. The red line would be the teacher, and the yellow lines would be the students. At any point in time in the lesson, the teacher is right here. And if you've been teaching for more than 5 minutes, you experience this. The class is all over the place. The students who are around that center line, chances are whatever you're teaching is in their proximal zone, and they're with you. The students who are lagging behind over to the left, well, chances are the content that you're teaching them is in their distal zone. And those to the right, it's in their current knowledge zone, so they're moving ahead. And I know sometimes as teachers we say it's good for students to get a refresher, reinforcement, listen again. But the reality is, once our brains have tackled something and mastered it, they get moving on. They don't really want to sit and learn about it again. So you have students all over the place, and the problem is, how do we work in such a way that we can address all of their needs so that we can continually be teaching students in their proximal zone? We're going to add to Lev Vygotsky's work with a gentleman by the name of Csikszentmihalyi. Now, he wrote a book called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Living. And he said that when you are in flow, everything else just fades away. You are so engrossed in whatever you are doing that you lose all track of time and other people. And that obviously a goal in life is to be in flow whenever you can. So what does flow look like in the classroom? For each classroom activity that you give your students, there's a challenge from low to high. And the students themselves bring a set of capabilities, their skill set. We're going to slice it through the middle here because that's going to be our area of flow, where the student's capability and the challenge are kind of meeting such that the challenge is just above the student's level of capability. If, as you teach students, you are presenting them with a challenge that is just above their capability level, they will be in flow. I'll come back to that in a minute, but let's look at what typically happens in a classroom. When you offer whole class skill instruction, you have some students whose capabilities are lower than the demands of the situation. So they're not able to reach that. That would be teaching them in their distal zone. So they become panicked, anxiety-ridden, worried, maybe they zone out. And then you have other students whose capabilities are much higher than the challenge of the situation. Those might be the ones where you're teaching in their current knowledge zone. And so they become bored and potentially zone out. But for the students for whom you are giving a challenge that is just above their capability level, they will be in flow. And we see this with video games. Why is it that students can spend endless hours in front of a video game? You know, we talk about students not having any kind of attention span, but that's not true because you watch them playing a video game. The trick to the video game is something called leveling up. You start at level 1 and you work at it until you finally succeed. And then you're like, yes. And then what happens? You go to level 2, which is slightly more difficult. So you get challenged, you fail a couple of times, but then you get it. Yes, on to step 3. At level 3, you're getting a little bit more of a challenge, and the idea goes on and on and on, that with each level, you're getting a slightly higher challenge than your capability. And each time you get there, you have built your skills. Effectively, your current knowledge zone expands, and that makes your proximal zone expand, so you can learn more and more and more. And that's why video games hook students. And that's what teachers need to do in the classroom, keeping those students in flow in order to hook them. Well, in order to create a differentiated learning environment, clearly from the slides we've just looked at, that won't come from teaching whole class instruction in front of the room. Instead, we can use problem-based learning to create an environment that would allow us to provide many activities to students so that we could challenge them all just above their ability level. Another challenge is ensuring that students understand the content, not just memorize it. So I like to use the idea of learning to drive. Now, if you think about driving, you can break it down into a set of skills, and we need all of these skills in order to be a successful driver. But I'm going to venture to say that when you first learned how to drive, whoever taught you didn't say, today we're going to learn to accelerate. So put the pedal to the metal and let's go. Tomorrow we'll learn braking. Now that may seem comical, but the reality is that happens all the time in classrooms. We take a much larger performance and we break it down into skills, and then Monday we work on skill 1, and Tuesday we work on skill 2, and so forth, thinking that if we teach all of the sub-skills, that suddenly the student will be able to handle the performance. And we know that's not true. If we go back to learning to drive, I learned to drive in a parking lot. So you learn to drive in a parking lot, and when you put together all of those skills, you're accelerating, you're braking, you're looking in mirrors, you're turning, using turn signals, it's a little clumsy, but you're managing it. Once you start to succeed at that, you level up and you start driving on side streets. A little bit better, not a lot of traffic. Again, working on the skills, honing all of those skills. Braking, accelerating, using your mirrors, changing gears, working on all of those as you drive on side streets. Then you start driving on main streets, more traffic, a little bit more challenging, still honing those skills. And then eventually, if you learn the way I did, your parents get out of the car and let you go on the highway yourself. The reality is we learn to drive through a full performance that has us utilizing a lot of skills and building those skill levels. And that's how we learn, through performances. So in a classroom, we need to think about having students learn in a total performance where they have to use a lot of skills, where at first the skills are a little bit clumsy, they need a lot of help, extra scaffolding, but eventually they build mastery of those skills in that particular performance. We can promote that application of content in performances through problem-based learning. Finally, the fourth challenge, how do we ensure that students actually engage with content? Well, William Glasser wrote a book years ago called Control Theory, and his premise was that you cannot control learning, that students choose to learn. So many people didn't like the name of the book, that he reissued the book years later as Choice Theory. And he said that there are essentially 4 characteristics, 4 conditions that must be available in order for students to choose to learn. The first is a sense of belonging. We all seek a sense of belonging. So students need to feel like they belong to a group, a team, a pair, a class, a home group, whatever it is, in order for them to feel safe and choose to learn. Secondly, they need freedom. They need to be able to have some choices. They need to be able to work a little bit independently. They need to be able to make some decisions. And freedom is another characteristic, another condition through which children choose to learn. Taking it a step higher, power is the third condition for students choosing to learn. And with power, that means a little bit higher level decision making, where they're making choices about what they will do, when they will do it, how they will go about doing it. Maybe students are actually suggesting to the teacher lessons that they need or ideas for projects that they could get involved in, and that gives them a sense of power. Finally, fun. And Glasser didn't believe that fun meant games and ice cream, but actual engagement in content so that students are solving a problem and it is fun to explore content in a variety of ways. So if students have a sense of belonging, freedom, power, and fun, they will choose to learn. Once again, that points to a problem-based learning environment that can foster all of those conditions. It turns out that problems can be opportunities for learning. And especially with the internet, we can find problems all over the world that are just wonderful, ripe environments for studying content. The case for problem-based learning. Thanks for listening.